Hi, I'm Harper. I'm a computer scientist who specialized in AI for the last decade, and now I'm an AI educator. My goal is to make AI clear and accessible to everyone, and to filter the hype and bring truth. If this is of interest to you, I hope you'll look at my channel and subscribe if it's useful to you. Today, we're interviewing Dr. Bonnie Kruft. Dr. Bonnie Kruft is a partner/deputy director of AI for Science at Microsoft in Cambridge, UK, leading a global team of ML researchers, engineers, and domain experts advancing machine learning for scientific discovery. The team focuses on tackling critical challenges including climate change, green energy, sustainable materials, and drug discovery. Previously, she was head of R&D data, analytics, and AI at AstraZeneca, delivering AI services across biopharmaceutical and oncology research, including an augmented drug design platform and biological insights knowledge graph that transformed how scientists design molecules and select drug targets. She holds a PhD in quantum chemistry. I hope you'll enjoy this conversation.
Hi, Bonnie. Thank you so much for being here.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here.
I am so excited to talk to you. I'm so impressed by your work and your career, and it's just such a treat to be able to talk to you today because I am so excited about AI and scientific discovery. I think it's such an area that so many people aren't really aware of the advancements that are being made in AI and scientific discovery, and I'm so just grateful to have you here to talk about it.
It's great to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
So to start, what first inspired you to work at the intersection of AI and scientific discovery? Because there's a lot of areas that you can go into in AI. So why AI and research scientific discovery?
Okay. So I've always been drawn to solving complex, really meaningful problems, and always drawn to science. So science was like my first love, really. In fact, I was torn between whether to pick between biology or chemistry when I was in university. And I ended up picking chemistry because I felt like in my organic chemistry courses, we were just there solving puzzles and it was lots of fun. So I ended up doing my PhD in quantum chemistry. And so I was also very interested in drug discovery and medicine. So I was using quantum chemistry to study drug-resistant tuberculosis. And it was at that time when I started to learn more about data science and machine learning. And so I decided sort of later in my PhD that I wanted a career that combined those two things. It's the computational part of AI and machine learning, plus the drug discovery part, which uses a lot of quantum chemistry approaches too. And so that's the moment where I decided to jump into that world, and at the intersection of AI and scientific discovery.
Just very briefly, what exactly is quantum chemistry?
So, yeah, great question. So, we understand the behavior of molecules in many different ways. And one way to understand that is by looking at the laws of physics. So you can either understand something using Newtonian physics, which is like modeling something with a ball and a spring. Or you can look a little bit deeper and start to understand how the electrons in those molecules work. And that's governed by quantum physics. And so quantum chemistry is basically the study of molecules and the particles within them, so electrons and such, using quantum physics. And then we can really deduce the behavior and mechanisms of those molecules with each other.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. I learned a little bit about quantum mechanics when I was in high school a little bit. And it's so fascinating. It's such a world that is kind of magical. So I love that you got your PhD in that and you're applying it with AI now, which is wonderful. Yeah. And so, okay, I want to learn a little bit more about AI for science. So please tell us more about that.
Yeah. Okay. So AI for science is essentially, it's just about using artificial intelligence to model, to understand, and then ultimately help to accelerate breakthroughs in the natural and physical sciences. So that could be anything from molecular simulations, so things within quantum chemistry, to things like material design, to weather forecasting, or even finding new medicines. So I think one important thing is the difference between AI for science and traditional AI, like large language models. It really comes down to the data. So when you have something like language, like human language, we have massive data sets. that you can just scrape from the internet. But in science, it's a little bit different. So the data is more scarce. It's often pretty expensive to produce. You either have to generate within a lab, which is expensive in itself, or you have to generate computationally. But what's really interesting, I think, is that we can use something like a quantum simulation to generate synthetic training data. And then that data can then be used to train a deep learning model, and we call those emulators. And then those emulators can then approximate the simulator, essentially. And then once those deep learning models are trained, they can predict the properties of a molecule or a material or whatever we're looking at, a protein, usually several orders of magnitude faster than the original. So it makes it a super powerful tool for accelerating scientific discovery. And so that's really kind of what AI for Science is.
Wonderful. So you guys are using a lot of synthetic data in order to train these models because of the relative scarcity. Yeah.
Especially when it comes to things like molecules and proteins, right? We don't have to generate that data in a lab. We don't have to extract it from patients or clinical trials. So I think sort of in the early drug discovery space or in the natural sciences, we have this opportunity to use the natural laws of physics to then generate that data for us, which is incredibly exciting. But of course, we need experimental data to validate what we're working on. If we find a new protein or a new medicine or a drug candidate, we need to go into the lab and test whether it actually works. Whether, let's say we've designed a synthetic route for a new drug molecule, and we've done that using an AI model, we have to go to the lab to actually test it out and see if it works and if it works. There are, of course, other AI for science challenges, say, and sort of like later human stage clinical trials and such, where it's much more difficult to generate synthetic training data.
Have you found the synthetic training data to work well? So you use it to train the models, and then you come up with these candidates, and then you go into the lab to actually see if those candidates are functional or working in the way that you would expect them to, right? Have you found that they tend to, and that the synthetic training data works quite well?
Yeah, we're actually seeing some really great results. So we did have one model that's called TAMGen. It stands for Target Aware Molecular Generation. So we worked with a lab that helped us to, basically they were looking for new treatments for tuberculosis. And using our model, we were able to find a new potential drug candidate that was over 100 times more effective than the current leading compound. So we're seeing a lot of great results, all based on the models that we're building.
Yeah, so I want to talk a little bit about how AI is actually changing scientific discovery and changing science. So people hear, right, that AI is enabling these drug discoveries that are, way more effective, that you're saying 100 times more effective. Let's talk about how AI is that optimizer that can find that optimal value, like how it actually functionally works.
Yeah, good question. I think one way to look at it is, we've been doing scientific discovery for basically the same way for centuries. And especially when it comes to drug discovery, people tend to focus on sort of a very narrow space. So if you think about chemical space is massive, but we as humans tend to only sort of work in a narrow area. And if you think about whether it's a medicine or a material, typically we end up screening hundreds to thousands to even millions of compounds before we actually get to the one that we want. But AI, one, it helps us to search a wider space. So to be more efficient in how we search that overall chemical space, but then also helps us to narrow down on what it is that we're looking for from the start. So if we have a better idea of, say, in drug discovery, what is the biological target that I'm going after, and I have a better understanding of the biology of it because I'm understanding of the protein, I can then design a molecule that's going to bind more effectively to it, rather than starting with hundreds of thousands of compounds and then slowly filtering down to find one that might stick. So it's about fundamentally changing the process and making us more efficient and effective in how we search that chemical space.
Right. I mean, you're screening potentially millions of potential combinations that you would otherwise go down this route of trying and then failing, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it a lot of times it is trial and error. It's about, getting to the lab, testing it out. Is it going to work? No. And unfortunately, what ends up happening is, that by the time a molecule gets to clinical trials, they find out that it's either not safe enough or it's not effective enough. So, and usually that comes down to how well does that molecule bind to that protein target, or, does it have any off-target effects? Does it have any negative consequences or adverse events that it creates by binding to, say, a different target or a different protein in the body? So if we can, from the beginning, start to understand and start to choose and decide which molecules that go forward in the clinic based on evidence that we're gathering through these AI models, or even things like synthetic routes. So a lot of times we'll find a molecule that seems to work really, really well, but then we can't actually figure out a way to make it. And what a shame that is if you've got something that has huge potential to help people. And let's say maybe you have a way to create it in the lab, but there's no way you could possibly scale that in manufacturing. And so AI is another way that you can look at, okay, what are all the possible synthetic routes that I can take? What's the most efficient one? What's going to be the one that creates the least amount of waste? Is the most cost efficient or energy efficient? So lots of different ways in which you can accelerate.
It's brilliant because there are so many pitfalls that you have from the beginning to the end of deployment of the actual product, right? There's so many different ways that it can fail, and you're able to just weed out on all of those levels until you find like the one that makes it, that would be most likely to make it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there are bottlenecks at essentially every stage of, say, drug discovery or materials design, and AI can be applied across that. And it's about how do we stitch that together in a way that accelerates the entire process, which is super exciting.
It's unbelievably exciting. And I would love to hear about, so you talked about TanGen, the drug discovery example. Do you have any other examples that you like to talk about, maybe with regards to green energy or sustainable materials where AI has made significant advancements?
Definitely. So in weather and climate, we have a foundation model called Aurora, and that forecasts atmospheric events like wind, precipitation, rain, temperature. And unlike traditional physics-based weather models, Aurora, the foundation model, it delivers forecasts at a higher resolution. It's faster and it consumes less energy, while still having the same amount of physical accuracy. And so what does that mean for people? That means that communities can be more prepared for disasters. We can do better energy and agriculture planning, and we can maybe even scale forecasting to regions that might be underserved. And I think in material science, we have a generative model called MatterGen. And so that is a generative model that allows you to design a new material with a specific property in mind. So let's say you want to find something that has a particular type of conductivity or stability or a certain amount of strength. So instead of running simulations and filtering through those millions of candidates we talked about before, you can generate a better, more defined set of relevant candidates that have those properties from the very beginning. And so that's something that we released this year, and we're actually working with industry partners to test that out.
So in terms of, for example, creating a material that has more conductivity, that could enable, computers to be more efficient, right? And use less energy to be powered.
Exactly. Yeah. Or we'll look at things like how can we create better data center cooling systems? Or how do we create more sustainable materials that we could use in, say, buildings or in other places too, or even in data centers as well.
That's so cool. Yeah, because we hear a lot, and this is something that I want to talk about the energy use of AI and how I'm constantly being asked, how can you use AI ethically because it uses so much energy? And I'd love to hear your take on that. And also how as we were just saying, AI is enabling these discoveries to make itself more efficient through all steps of the process. For example, even just the materials, right? So I'd love to hear your view on that.
Yeah. So I think the concerns about energy are valid and they need to be taken seriously. But I think what often gets missed is that AI can be part of the solution. It can help to solve this energy problem. So I mentioned Aurora. That's a model that reduces the compute need for weather forecasting, but it also improves the accuracy. I mentioned data center cooling. So you can use AI to optimize data center cooling. It can be used for things like nuclear fusion research. So AI is a consumer of energy, but that's not all. It's also a tool for discovering the next generation of energy solutions.
Yeah. Another concern that we find that people have is the fear of AI replacing all jobs.
Yeah.
And the way I like to think about this is that we will likely see jobs that we can't even imagine yet as AI enables more industries that we, again, can't even imagine yet. And I'm curious about your view on this as well, with the, concern about AI replacing human jobs.
Yeah. I think like any other major technological shift that we've had in society, AI will definitely change jobs. But I also think it's going to create entirely new ones too. So if you think about the internet, that disrupted traditional job roles, but it also created entirely new industries that you probably wouldn't have ever imagined. A YouTuber, an Instagrammer never was in an industry, and a job for people had a new technological advance come along. And so I think AI for scientific discovery, or AI in general, is really the same. So it's already opening up new industries. So that could be something like AI design materials, personalized medicines, maybe even synthetic biology. And so I think all in all, it's not just about the tools that are being created. It's the foundation that they're creating for maybe like an entirely new sector for an economy.
I love this. I want to hear a little bit more about personalized medicine and synthetic biology. So let's first start with personalized medicine. What does that look like today? Like, that's a new industry that's emerging. What does that look like?
Yeah. So I think AI can be really useful for helping us find new treatments, medicines for specific people. I think that the medicines industry has really focused on creating medicines that work for the average person, because typically that's the most cost-effective thing to do. But now, as we have new AI models, we can find new treatments or treatment plans that are specific to an individual, to help them respond better to a treatment, because not everyone responds to every treatment the same way. And so I think that's super powerful and super exciting that we have access to new medicines or new ways of treating people in better ways, and that'll be more effective.
I've talked to some people about this. I wish there were some kind of centralized database where we had, data on everyone and their attributes and potential symptoms and diseases they develop and treatments that they've tried and whether they've worked or not. Is that something that you've thought about? Because that is the perfect data set for AI. And if we had everything centralized, we really could have personalized medicine and we really could advance treatment and diagnosis so far.
Yeah, I think there are a number of really useful biobanks around the world that capture everything from genetic information, genetics and genomics, to treatment, to responses, to biomarkers, and all sorts of things. And so I think those are super useful and have been used to train a lot of these AI models. I think moving forward, if you create a foundation model that generalizes well enough across the population, then when you introduce it to, let's say you have a very unique patient with a very unique set of DNA, in theory, that AI model should be able to also infer on that patient's data as well. And so that's the power of these foundation models, is that they work really well across a variety of different questions.
Let's talk about, eventually we'll come back to synthetic biology. I want to talk about foundation models in science. What do they look like? We know foundation models in the context of like a standard English large language model. things like Meta, Grok, ChatGPT, Claude. We have these massive models that are kind of massive brains trained on the entire internet. And I'm telling, I know you know this, but I'm just sharing with the listener. We have these massive models that are trained on the entire internet, and they kind of encompass the entire world of what we would know. How does that look in the science world?
Yeah. So I think a lot of the AI models that we see today are about generating content. And in scientific research, it's not just about that, but also to capture the rich, deep laws of physics, chemistry, or biology that might govern those systems. So if you think about a large language model, I mentioned the difference in data. So like we said, data is abundantly available when it comes to a large language model, but it's more scarce when it comes to science. And so that means that we rely on synthetic training data a lot from simulations or from experimental data, or a combination of the two. And so ultimately, those foundation models in science are going to end up helping us to do things like predict molecular properties, help to accelerate lab experiments, and like I said, explore larger design spaces. So explore more chemical space than we were once able to.
So what do the models look like? So we're not talking about generative models here, although I think there are some generative models, right? It's like the amino, you kind of have like an amino acid generator, right? That creates proteins. It's kind of like similar structure to a large language model, but the tokens or the fragments of words are amino acids. That's like one style of generative AI that's in science, right? I'm curious what the architecture of these models look like.
Yeah, so I mean, another generative example is the materials example. That's actually a diffusion model. So it's similar to DALL-E and Sora. It's a diffusion model that helps create a new material in the same way that you would to generate an image or a video. And so there are a lot of parallels, but then there are other things that we can look at too. So we can use AI to say understand the dynamic movements of a protein, for example. So proteins aren't static, but they do have an interesting way to fold, and AlphaFold actually helped us to be able to scale that. But that's not the end of the story. Proteins actually move around, and that movement actually helps us to understand its function. And so we have an AI model that also helps us to understand what those movements are, and then that predicts the function, and then we can then design better medicines from that too.
Interesting. So that's like a time series model kind of, or is that kind of how it was made?
It's also a generative model, but it's built off of the simulations of the protein itself.
Very cool. And that's what the data looks like, is you have this example of how it changes over time.
Exactly. Yeah.
Very cool. And so some of the main challenges with applying these large language models to science is augmenting them with the understanding of physics. And that's also been a major challenge that Yann LeCun has talked about with achieving AGI. We won't get into AGI today, but I'm curious about how you have seen the challenges in augmenting, I guess, current generative models with physics, and if that's something that you tend to do. I recall seeing a talk that you gave where you were talking about using these models that are the combinations of the two.
Yeah. So I think traditional large language models aren't very good at doing math. I mean, they can do simple math, but doing sort of complex numerical calculations in physics is not something that it's particularly great at. And so what's important is that when you build these AI for science models, you need to build those scientific priors into the model itself. And that's by governing it in those laws of physics, the laws of science. And I think the challenge is, how do we ensure that the AI models are, that they're respecting the boundaries of those laws, but then they also generalize well to new conditions, and that domain experts can use them to interpret. And so I think in our team, I think we've made really good progress by incorporating those inductive biases into into the model itself by using the synthetic data that's built off of simulations that are driven from those laws of physics. And then I think very importantly, working really closely with domain scientists to validate and also constrain the models. I think ultimately AI for science is a deeply multidisciplinary industry. So, it cannot be done with just an engineer or a machine learning engineer. It needs to be done in collaboration with scientists that understand the domain and can ask the right questions.
Yeah. And speaking of which, how would you advise current researchers to integrate AI into their research? Because I know there's obviously a lot of scientific discovery going on right now. And how wonderful would it be if AI were applied to all of those research initiatives? So, yeah, what would you advise?
Yeah. I mean, I think the important thing is to first get curious and start small, maybe. So pick a question in your area, in your research, where AI or better predictions could make a big difference. So my advice is to maybe start with getting familiar with the basics of machine learning, and collaborate with people that bring the understanding of the science and also of the modeling. And ultimately, it's not everyone has to become an AI expert, but it's about getting started and knowing enough to start to apply it meaningfully in whatever domain that you work in.
Yeah. And AI for science, is that only under Microsoft's, are all of the teams under AI for science under Microsoft, or what does that look like?
So we're actually part of Microsoft Research. So Microsoft Research is part of the wider Microsoft ecosystem. But it's a unique place to be because our goal is to do cutting edge research. So it's not necessarily about building a new commercial platform but of course what we build and what we find usually does ultimately end up becoming part of our product portfolio. But ultimately it's about how do we ask the most cutting edge questions, and then how do we find new insights from that? And then ultimately that does usually eventually become part of something commercial. But the main goal is really to focus on the research and the science.
Yeah, I mean, it's wonderful. And speaking of how do you ask the most cutting edge questions, do you have a framework for that? And or I'm curious if you are able to share what some of the most cutting edge questions are that you are thinking about now and working on developing towards.
Good question. I think in this field, the most important thing is to allow researchers to experiment and explore. But at the same time, it's important to stay focused because we don't have the resources or the time to be able to work on every single question that there might be. There's millions of possible potential challenges that we could work on, but simply don't have the time and resources to work on all of them. So we do try to be very, very focused. And so we work in a couple different areas. We work on the foundation of quantum chemistry. So finding better ways to better simulate the behavior of molecules and materials. So we recently published a paper. It's called Scala DFT. This is about how do we basically improve an existing theory. It's called density functional theory. And that is used, it's a quantum chemistry simulation. And we use that to essentially learn a component of that theory using deep learning. And that's been able to show that we can have more accurate and faster solutions to that equation. And by doing that, without going into the super deep technical detail of how it works, that'll help us to design better molecules and materials or create new energy solutions. But that creates a really important foundation for us because that is one of the ways in which we generate that synthetic training data for additional applications. So that those applications might also be things like materials, as I said, so finding new materials that might be more sustainable or used for better energy solutions, and then also within proteins. So as I mentioned, so understanding the dynamic movements of protein, for better drug discovery and applications, and then also things like small molecules, which make up a huge portion of drug discovery today, and how we can make them more efficiently in the lab. So it's quite a broad range of things, but we really look at what are going to be what are the key challenges in science? What are those grand challenges that, have perhaps been unsolved for centuries, that AI can help to accelerate?
Yeah. I mean, with this example, you called it it's not the probability density function. What did you call it? It sounded something like that.
So it's called density functional theory.
Density functional theory. That underlies all of these different scientific advancements. So then by optimizing that, you're then able to, I guess, have that optimization applied to all these different areas. So that's how you're finding the most cutting edge question, right? Is actually going to kind of the source. Like, what is the common factor literally in all of these, right?
Yeah, essentially. So it's really about, that's sort of the underlying physics, the theory that, if we could solve it exactly, then we would understand how the behavior of a molecule or a protein behaves exactly. We could predict it. And if we can solve that in a better way, which, today people make approximations for this, but those approximations are always a trade-off between something. And so by using AI to improve our understanding and our simulations of that, we can then create better ways to do things like designing new molecules or materials.
Can you briefly explain DFT to the audience if you have a good maybe analogy or example?
Yeah. Okay. So I think if I take like a super, super simple example, if you are, let's say you're looking at, let's say you're trying to understand the behavior of a city you're looking at the city and you're tracking the behavior of every single person. You track where they go to lunch, you track who they're talking to, and all these things. So ultimately, it's going to be pretty accurate, but it's going to be extremely complicated and very, very time consuming. In fact, you'll probably just give up because it's going to be too much work to do. And so this density functional theory, it kind of does the same thing, but for electrons within molecules. So instead of tracking every single electron, there's another way you can approximate it. So if you go back to the analogy of the city, rather than looking at every single individual, let's look at groups of people. Let's look where sort of like what are the patterns where people might move to, or, what time do people go to lunch, or, this group of people might have this behavior. But we're not looking at individuals there. You're looking at sort of groups of people. So the same thing can be applied within molecules. So that instead of looking at individual electrons, you can look at sort of the density of the electrons, where it tends to be. And that can help us to predict the behavior of the molecules themselves.
That makes complete sense. That's a great analogy. Thank you. And again, this is quantum, right? This is quantum physics that we're talking about because you're trying to predict the location of an electron. So that's down to quantum, right?
Yeah. So it's all governed by quantum physics, basically.
Very cool. Yeah. I remember learning about in high school where, once you think the location of, was it an electron? It's actually not there anymore. So that's one of the main issues with that is you're grappling with quantum. So having this kind of theory of where groups of them might be at any given time is probably a good way to address that issue.
Exactly. Yeah. So if you know where the majority of electrons are going to be, then that's more likely to help us understand the behavior, say when it's in a reaction with another molecule, perhaps. But I think that's the beauty of quantum physics and quantum chemistry. It's all this sort of like weird, spooky behavior, but when you put it all together, it's actually like, oh, okay, this all makes sense.
It's so beautiful. I think quantum physics is so cool.
Yeah, super cool.
It's super cool. Okay, so let's go back. You mentioned briefly synthetic biology and that being an emerging industry, and I just want to touch on that.
Yeah. So I think synthetic biology could be, are we engineering proteins? Are we engineering new microbes? So there could be a whole great number of applications where synthetic biology could be used.
Yeah, and I'm thinking about, as these tools become more accessible, perhaps we'll have more scientists, applying AI optimizations, right, to every single possible problem. Like, I think training people to conduct this kind of research, or maybe not even at the research level, but existing within the kind of discovery pipeline, that may become a much bigger industry than it is today. And we might see so many more advancements in every single area. And that's what I'm most excited about. I want to help educate people about AI so that they can apply it to their own specific industry, specific niche. And so, yeah, maybe we'll just see discovery blossom as a whole industry.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think ultimately AI is going to be a partner in whatever industry you might work in. And so, that's a partner that would help not just in science, but to help generate a new hypothesis. It can run experiments. It could summarize the literature for you, or even design something new. So I think when you think about having AI as a partner, that means that you'll spend less time doing sort of very manual, repetitive tasks, and more time asking important questions.
Right. And I think another concern then, just kind of pivoting to the list of the concerns that I've heard from people, we've got energy usage, we've got job replacement. Another one is privacy. So we see new tools cropping up that are free tools, even by large companies. For example, radiology analysis, and analyzing radiograph images, like X-rays and other types of scans, which are wonderful that we can have that kind of analysis because they spot really small issues. For example, I think breast cancer now is being diagnosed like 5 years earlier than it would have been before because of AI. But I have heard some people are skeptical about using some of these widely available softwares. I know you all have your own RAD Dino, right? Mm-hmm. So how do you think about, addressing some of those concerns that people may have?
Yeah. I mean, I think, first of all, I think data privacy is really a fundamental and important challenge, especially in things like healthcare. So I think it's really important that we as Microsoft and also other companies take a deeply responsible approach to how models are trained, they're tested, and then deployed. And so I think the most important thing is that there are strong governance frameworks, and we're transparent on how we handle the data. And we also work really closely with clinicians and regulators. And so I think it's important not only to build trust, but also to sort of maintain responsibility behind everything that's being built, especially in healthcare.
And so that's something that you all are focusing on as a kind of central core tenet of the process.
Yes, absolutely. Making sure that we have transparent processes, we have strong governance frameworks, and we're working directly with clinicians and regulators to ensure that data remains safe, and then also the outputs and the outcomes of the model themselves are safe too.
What does that look like? You mean they're safe in that they won't, misdiagnose, or they won't have any kind of output that is, what does harmful look like or unsafe look like in that context?
Yeah, so I think ultimately the models are used by a clinician to make a decision. And so the clinicians are understanding of the models, how they work, and then can use those models and understand how they were built and how they were trained, and how to use them in the best way to then make a decision that might affect a patient.
Yeah.
So being safe is about having the right framework for use, really.
Right. I've talked to some various companies about this and how they're approaching it in their own ways, not in the domain of science necessarily, but even just in business, like making sure AI, you don't have agents doing something that, working on a process where if they messed up, it would be catastrophic, right? Like actually really being thoughtful about where you're applying AI and being aware of how accurate it is and how it is, how its outputs, how well they can be trusted, being thoughtful about the questions or areas that AI is being applied to so that you don't have any outsized harms, right?
Yeah, exactly. I think there could be 100% good positive intent of something, but it could also have a negative outcome. So I think it's important for users of AI to also think about, what are the potential consequences of using AI, and how can you ensure that you're using it in the best way, in the most beneficial way.
I mean, with the example of a radiograph analysis tool, what are some of the negatives there? I mean, for me, looking at that, I don't really see any negatives. I'm assuming that the data, if you're sending it to a large corporation like Microsoft, it would be anonymized before being stored. I'm not really sure what some of the dangers could be there. Are you aware of any that I'm not seeing? Or
Yeah, I think it's more about the data that's used in training should all be responsibly used. Maintaining data privacy, transparency on how it's been collected, but then ultimately how we use those models going forward is important to remain safe too. So it's not just about the training part, but it's about the output and the inference as well.
right. So for example, if you're using a radiography tool, making sure that you're aware as the person using the tool that it could have false positives or false negatives. So it could say you have an issue where you don't, or it could say you don't have an issue where you do, and just using that kind of discretion.
Yeah, so I think the clinician needs to, we have the accuracy of the models, and we build trust with them, but then also the clinician should, make sure that they're doing their due diligence to understand the output of it, and then compare that to their own knowledge and testing as well.
Right. Yeah.
To make sure that you're giving the patient the right diagnosis or the right treatment, or making sure that we're using AI as a tool alongside other tools that we have available too.
Yeah. I see this a lot with where, people who are teachers, I think, use AI really well because they're able to kind of fact check the outputs. AI, what I'm talking about in this case is large language models like ChatGPT. Teachers use them well because they do hallucinate. That is still an issue, even when they're augmented with, ability to search the web or something. They are still struggling with making up things. And so having this expert in the room with the AI model is where you can really have the best value with AI. Right.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it comes down to AI is a partner. So AI being a tool that's used alongside the clinician, and ultimately AI is not replacing deep human knowledge and experience, but it complements it.
I love that. I love that you also take that perspective, even with all that you're seeing and researching and doing over at Microsoft Research. So another really big concern that we hear about is the concern. I mean, there's a lot of doomerism where people think that AI might be the end of us. One of the concerns that you may know quite a bit about is with bioweapons. So what are your thoughts on that concern?
Yeah, I think this is a really serious concern, and one that needs to be taken seriously as well. So I think as AI becomes more powerful, especially in places like biology and chemistry, it's really essential that safety and governance are built into the models from the start. And so I think ways to do that would be things like strong access controls or use restrictions on sort of the most powerful models. So, you could build safeguards within the API, or monitor queries to ensure that tools aren't being misused. I think it's a challenge. It's a really important challenge that companies are working on solving. I think models can also be trained to recognize, and I think they've done this already with ChatGPT a bit. So models can be trained to recognize and block a dangerous request. So if someone tries to create something harmful, that's going to be flagged or blocked. So there are different ways to look at how to monitor and control and stop harmful use.
So bioweapons really are a major concern that we should be considering.
I mean, I think using AI models for biology and chemistry, I think having the right guardrails in place to prevent the creation of bioweapons is something very important, and something that should and will be focused on.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess the question is, how do we limit that outside of our own like jurisdiction, right? In like whatever countries we have. I guess maybe some type of international approach to this would be best. And it sounds like it's important.
Yeah, I think there's maybe a dual approach that has to be taken, right? So the model builders themselves should build guardrails into the models from the start, to prevent people from using the AI in a negative way. But then also, how do we partner with governments and regulatory industries to ensure that it's safe on a broader level? So I think both is really necessary.
It's sobering, but it's important that we consider these things. I'm very much an AI optimist, and so I like to believe that, AI is going to bring so many advancements and these kinds of concerns. I mean, how do you think about it, right? If there is this likelihood that AI could cause catastrophic damage, but then there's also such positivity that is a potential now from AI. How do you look at weighing those pros and cons?
To me, I think it's about AI can do such incredible good for the world. But I think also that's only if we build the right guardrails in place. For every good application, there could be a negative consequence or a misuse of it. So I think it's incredibly important that companies and governments are looking at how do we ensure that it's not getting into the hands of the wrong person or the wrong people that might want to use it for something malicious.
What would you say to the public to help them feel more optimistic about AI? We've just talked about how we need to have some regulation and governance around usage and kind of guardrails, of course. But how do you feel optimistic about it? And what would you say to the public listening to this to help them feel a little less afraid?
Yeah. So I think I didn't emphasize that AI it is a tool at the end of the day. It's not a replacement for human expertise. And what we're able to do with it is amplify you. It's there to amplify the ability of a scientist, of a clinician, of an engineer to do their very best work. And the way that we do that is it's important that it's grounded in collaboration. It's grounded in responsibility that includes, how do we create the right guardrails to ensure that it's not misused, and also ensuring that it's making the best impact. It's making impact that ultimately helps humanity in the best way, whether that's finding new medicines, making precision medicine available to people, finding better materials or energy solutions. So really about how do we use these tools to tackle real problems that matter to all of us.
Right. The potential is so vast in all areas that if we can just have some guardrails around the most extreme negative cases, then, I mean, it's wonderful. We could create some kind of, I don't know, I don't want to say utopia, but I mean, the potential is, I feel like potentially there.
Yeah. I don't know if it's utopia yet, but
Not yet.
I think, if we can, solve more challenges to treating diseases or, finding new materials to, be more sustainable to help the environment and help our world and our communities. These are all the start of, I think, something very exciting. And it may be scary for people. It's something new. There's always a potential for misuse. But I think one thing that helps me is knowing that this is something that's on the minds of many people. And there are teams. Microsoft even has a responsible AI team that's looking into how to address this in the right way. So that brings me comfort, at least, is knowing that this isn't a problem that's being ignored.
Wonderful. Yeah. And kind of on that note, and I think a good note to end on, what are some of the trends or discoveries that you are most excited about over the next few years with AI and scientific discovery?
Yeah, I think I'm really excited to see how these new foundation models are going to be applied. So, what are the new proteins? What are the new molecules? What are the new synthetic roots and new materials that are going to come from all of this? And I think that's where the magic is really going to happen. There's right now it's AI foundation models with a lot of potential, but then what'll really be exciting is whatever discoveries come out of it, and then how we apply them to real world problems.
Oh, I know it's such an exciting future ahead. And ideally, we'll have more people going to scientific discovery, like we talked about.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Be great.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me today, Bonnie. It's been such a pleasure. I am so excited to see what else comes out of, your team at Microsoft Research and the wonderful discoveries you guys are making. And I have just really enjoyed having the ability the opportunity to talk to you. So thank you for coming.
Thank you so much. It was great to be here, and it was great to meet you.
Likewise.
I hope you enjoyed this conversation. And if so, let me know in the comments and let's start a discussion. Do you have any questions? Do you have any comments? And if you liked this, please hit subscribe, like, share it with a friend. It helps my channel a lot. And yeah, thanks. I'll see you next time. Bye.